Hello, welcome or welcome back. I'm Zach Markowski with Sharper Pen Image Consulting. Today I'm doing more literary analysis, and in line with what I've been talking about, I'm kind of putting a capstone on my ongoing discussion of irony being tyranny, not in the traditional literary and tragic sense, but in the modern corporate culture and political sense, because the tyranny of irony is not saying what you mean. It's being a prisoner and not being able to honestly or earnestly express yourself. It's about saying at the end of the day, there's nothing you can do about it. And this will become apparent momentarily. But in the meantime, I have a essay written here by Ludwig Klages, which I quoted from the other day. I read from the other day. It's called Man and Earth, or in German, Mensch and Erde. And I'm just going to go on ahead and get into it. And I'll do a little bit of commentary, but a lot of it speaks for itself. So it begins. Whoops. Man and Earth. Every age, and ours is surely no exception, proclaims certain slogans which embody the inner tendencies of the age. Such slogans possess the power to silence the voice of doubt in the minds of disciples, as if with a deafening roar of drums. A new trend is always on display, and even the unbiased few soon congregate around its banner. The three predominant slogans of our own time are, and these are in quotation marks, progress, culture, and personality. As it happens, in order that the idea of progress may achieve ascendancy as the exclusive creed of our times, its rivals soon relinquish their positions and lend their support, and even their characteristic colors, to the victor. Thus, there are those who suggest that we cannot be inferior to the primitive peoples to whom our history books devote a few preliminary paragraphs, and for anyone who questions them as the basis of their conviction, they have a ready response. Science now commands heights never before achieved, and technology has at last subjugated nature. Therefore, every earlier form of human culture must beat a helpless retreat before them. Science, which now effectively exploits the inexhaustible riches of the earth, methodologically contributes to the general prosperity. Space and time permeated by long-distance communication systems, and even the limitless atmosphere have finally been conquered by the genius of technology. It is not, however, for the convinced disciple of this faith in technology, which will die with him, but more for the members of a younger generation which still asks questions, that we desire to lift at least a corner of the veil in order to reveal the perilous self-deception that lurks behind it. So I think this was, when he says, which will die with him, when I think of that, I think of what I last said about Big Brother and our discussion on irony and tragedy in 1984, where I said, Big Brother was the insecure God that a insecure and destructive people created, right? He was an insecure and destructive God because he demanded total obedience. There could be nothing outside of him, right? He just conquered the world. He conquered the human mind. And in Western psychology is basically, Skinner kind of got into behavioralism in like the teens and the 20s, and the corporation state got a hold of that, and it's just been, how do we manipulate these blocks of wood ever since? It's been, the banality of evil ever since. It's been just unthinking, unfeeling, destructive tendencies and belief systems. And so when he says he's going to lift a corner of the veil in order to reveal the perilous self-deception that lurks behind it, this is why irony is tyrannical, because it probes and pushes the veil without piercing it, right? So both of those, amongst educated and cultured and civilized people, both of those are technically seen as rude. Like, and if you don't understand what I mean, can you understand why Socrates asking his questions is an asshole? Can you understand why people would put him to death? Or in the case of primitive Christian tribes in Europe, and through the thousands of years of history that preceded today, the idea of burning a witch or killing or ostracizing, having your scapegoat, right? That target for the excess destructive contents of consciousness or whatever it is, any kind of hatred or malice or excess superstition or whatever these forces are that have always been at work within human psychology and being, whether that was through in paganism or in monotheism, and the monotheistic tendency was to always have a scapegoat, because at the end of the day, if you have your enemy, there's one thing, it's a target for the group's excess emotions or emotions in general, right? A target for them to work towards even. And then from there, you could also say that I was thinking more like that whole tendency is, it's psychologically speaking, what does one person matter? What does one individual matter when you're talking about the eternal salvation of an entire village's soul, right? It's like, well, they can't go to hell because of one heretic, right? So you burn the heretic, right? Anything perceived outside yourself as a threat, right? That's common human feeling. Um, a common type of human feeling. I'm not going to say everyone feels that way or is that way. Anyway, so irony is tyranny because it probes the veil without piercing it. And it's kind of saying, hey, look at these. Can you kind of make out these invisible prison bars, right? And now look, there's nothing you can do about it. Is it funny? I don't know. But Klages is very sincere here. So he goes on. In addition, those who still see something strange in the view that the guiding idea of progress has led to horrendous results should be puzzled for other reasons. To the ancient Greeks, the loftiest desire was to achieve, I forget what this word, how it's pronounced, kalagathi, which was that harmonious wedding of man's inner and outer beauty that they saw embodied in the images of the Olympians. To the men of the Middle Ages, it was the salvation of the soul, which they saw as the soul's ultimate ascension of God, right? They still believed in a lot of them believed in believing, right? They weren't cynical and nihilistic like the modern age is. Which ironically, the same modern age that says they have things figured out and these other people are the backwards ones, that the previous people. Yes, I use the word primitive, but I'm just using that to point out that the primitive Christian is no different, right? They live in a world of symbols. The world is often a fever dream, and they still interpret dreams in a very projective sort of manner, right? In the sense that the psyche has always been animistic, and there's no avoiding that fact that it always begins with projection, right? And there's more to it than just projection and reflection, as a lot of people get caught up in thinking about. Um, so Klages goes on. He's talking about the previous goals of previous ages, where men earnestly put their thoughts and time and feeling, which they saw the soul's ultimate ascension to God. The man in Goethe's time, it was poised perfection of style. The masterful acceptance of one's destiny, and no matter how diverse such goals may have been, we can easily comprehend the profound satisfaction that was experienced by those whose good fortune enabled them to achieve them, right? The fruits of a civilization, the budding flowers of a civilization. But the progress monger of today is mindlessly proud of his successes. Oh, it's hilarious to me what people call success these days. For he has somehow managed to convince himself that every increase in mankind's power entails an equivalent increase in mankind's value. We must doubt, however, whether he is able to experience true joy, and not just the hollow satisfaction afforded him by the mere possession of power. By itself, however, power is completely... See, and I don't, Klages' definition of power here, right? It's a bit suspect to me. I'll admit that. Like, kind of like, this is the way things are. It shows you how people are. So if they say one thing and then do and mean another, everyone is pursuing their happiness, right? So if people are where they're at, I'm pointing out that you always question the people doing the questioning. So we must doubt, however, whether he's able to experience true joy. But I'm not trying to shed doubt on what he's saying here, because I agree with him. This is the whole, I've discussed this before, right? Not just that we've invented happiness, but also how the shallow happiness of the modern era and culture is so vapid as to be incomprehensible to anyone who needs more than surface level images and mindless ways to spend your time, whether at work or play. By itself, however, power is completely blind to all values, blind to truth, as it is blind to justice. Finally, power is undoubtedly blind to all the beauty of life that has thus far survived the encounter with progress. See, I'd say maybe the machine itself is blind, right? This is why tool worship is absurd. Why thinking technology can save you is absurd. Uh, Finally, power is undoubtedly blind to all the beauty of life has to offer, thus far survived the encounter with progress. Let us add some well-known items to our account. The preeminence of science is concluded. It is immune to all objections, however slight. The high standing of technology is also beyond doubt, and yet one might well ask, what are the fruits thereof? As the Bible wisely says, it is only by their fruits that we should estimate the value of the works of man. Let us begin with beings whose status as living organisms no one would question, the plants and animals. We recall that the ancients dreamt of a lost golden age or paradise, a realm wherein the lion would lie down with the lamb, and even the serpent would dwell with man as his protective spirit. Even this idea is not so utterly fantastic as the false doctrine that teaches us that all of nature is perpetually in the grip of ceaseless struggle for existence, right? You know, the dreary English definition, or the Darwinian definition of existence. How could that which already exists struggle for existence, right? This is why I say the notion of the definition of power seems a bit off to me, because it's like, no, every power is already manifesting its ultimate consequence at every moment. Hence, right, you know, when I ask you and remind you, how's the war going? You know, how are we going to finally win the war? You know, that's to remind you that there's three superpowers who encircle the globe like a leviathan or a super dragon, right? Um, so are we finally going to win the war? So, by their fruits you'll know them. Golden age or paradise? Nope. Even this idea is not really fantastic. Oh yeah, the struggle for existence, right? So what exists already exists. It's not, how is it struggling for existence? No, it's engaging in its happiness. It's living out what it is. The cat doesn't kill to survive. The cat kills because it's part of the cat's happiness. Um, the scientists who study this polar regions tell us the fearless intimacy with which penguins, reindeers, sea lions, seals, and seagulls greet the first appearance of man, right? That plenty of creatures are symbiotic. Plenty of creatures are perfectly friendly and maybe more friendly spirits. Pioneer, or maybe, and then to modern cynical people, that would be naive. Pioneers who have explored the tropical regions never fail to amaze us with the images they communicate. 'Cause remember, this is 1913, so no internet. No, they're barely getting, like, they're working on telegraphs still. Especially those who pertain to the moment in which these students first perceive arrayed in peaceful cohabitation swarms of wild geese, cranes, ibis, flamingos, herons, storks, marabous, giraffes, zebras, gnus, antelope, and gazelles. Herd and flock animals. We understand completely the true symbiosis that embraces the entire animal kingdom, which extends throughout the entire planet. Right? They don't annihilate each other in particular ways. However, as soon as the man of progress arrives on the scene, he announces his masterful presence by spreading death and the horror of death all around him. And I know some people like to compare us to like ants or other animals who war, but I'd like to think that man is at least a little bit more, has a little bit more of a brain than an ant. So, you know, a lot of these conversations and comparisons in the animal kingdom are just plain stupid or absurd. How many of the species of creatures that flourished in ancient Germanic lands have lasted into our century? Baron, wolf, lynx and wildcat, bison, elk, and aurochs, eagle and vulture, crane and falcon, swan and owl have all become creatures inhabitants only of our fairy tales. This was the case, in fact, even before the introduction of our new and improved wars of annihilation. But there is a cause for even deeper merriment. Under the most ironic of all moronic of all pretexts, which insists the vast number of animal species are actually noxious pests. Our progress monger has extirpated nearly every creature who happens to not be a partridge, a roe deer, a pheasant, or if need be, a pig. Wild boar, ibex, fox, pine marten, weasel, duck, and otter, all animals which with the legends dear to our memory are intimately intertwined, right? Not if you cut that memory off from history, are shrinking and make up a new story, right? A new corporately manufactured story brought to you by the state, are shrinking in numbers where, that is, they have not already become extinct. Seagull, tern, cormorant, duck, heron, kingfisher, red kite, and owlet are all ruthlessly hunted down. The communities of seals on the coast of the North Sea and the Baltic are condemned to destruction. We know more than 200 names of German towns and villages whose names derive from the word beaver, a fact that constitutes proof of the flourishing of these industrious roads in earlier times. Today there still exists a small preserve on the Elbe River between Torgau and Wittenberg, but even this refuge will soon disappear without immediate statutory protection. And who is not afflicted with grave anxiety to witness year after year the disappearance of our beloved singers, the migratory birds? Only a mere generation ago, the blue air of our cities was filled the summer long with the whir and buzz of swallows, the cries of sailors, sounds that, emerging from the distance, seemed to fill one with yearning for travel. At that time one could count in one suburb of Munich alone as many as 300 occupied nests, whereas today one can find only 4 or 5. More ominously, the countryside has become eerily silent. Throbbing no longer is at once every dew-laden morning in the joyous melody of Eichendorff's countless larks. Already one must consider oneself fortunate if, whilst walking amongst a remote forest path near a grassy sunlit hollow, one is privileged to hear just once the luminous and yearning call of the quail. At one time, throughout the length and breadth of Germany, these birds numbered many, many thousands, and they lived in the songs of the common people as well in the works of our poets. Magpie, woodpecker, golden oriole, warbler, rooster, grouse, and nightingale, they're all disappearing, and the decline seems to be utterly beyond remedy. So it's sort of a record keeping here. And if you think about it in another way, if so much is lost to time in history, including primitive peoples and their stories, compared to the stories and narratives of progress in our history books that are constantly rewritten, you can look back at times like this and see that these exist as records, or again, if you they exist in stark contrast to and exist aside of these modern manufactured stories and notions and ideas and beliefs. And these are it's basically an alternate history is what it is, because other people are like, what's that? I don't know this. I don't understand this. What does it mean? What is it? So anyway, beyond remedy. Today we see ever increasingly hordes huddled together in our big cities, where they grow accustomed to the soot-belching form of chimneys and the thunderous turmoil of the streets, where the nights are as bright as the days. These urban masses believe that they have had an adequate introduction to the world of nature as soon as they've caught a glimpse of a potato field or seen a single starling perched upon a branch of an emaciated roadside tree. No, like most people who think in terms of nature or think of nature as something separate, which is the Western world in general, it's like that's that thing you go to. That's that thing that you purposely beat back and kept outside yourself. That's the thing you're afraid of. That's the thing you're like, nature, something real, But to anyone who recalls the sounds and scents of the German landscape of 70 years ago, from out of the words and images in which these memories are embodied, a wind would arise to pronounce a warning reproach to lost souls of today's as soon as they begin to regurgitate their weatherproof platitudes about economic development, necessities, and culture. Right? Everyone's like, reality is statistical, right? We express no opinion as to whence mere utility derives its deplorable authority over all modern transactions. I know it's so tasteless, it's classless, it's garbage, right? We filled landfills with billions and trillions of dollars with trash. We've sunk trillions of dollars in the bottom of oceans and on battlefields the world over, right? All in the name of utility and necessity and what passes as culture. Nor will we waste our time in belaboring a point that will soon become common knowledge, right? And then nihilism thereafter. We merely state the simple fact that is in no conceivable case will human beings ever meet with success in their attempt to correct quote-unquote nature, right? This is why I brought up the behaviorists. This is why I brought up a corporate manufactured culture and narrative and history. Wherever the population of songbirds dwindles, we find an immeasurable proliferation of blood-sucking insects and caterpillars, which can devour whole vineyards and forests in a matter of days. It does sound like politics. Wherever one shoots the buzzard and exterminates the adder, a plague of mice swiftly erupts to bring destruction to the beehives. It does sound politics. Capitalism. As a result, the fertilization of the clover, which depends upon the bees, will not occur. With the aid of improved weapons, hunters massacre the finest specimens of wild deer, thus bringing about the degeneration of the herd through the excess reproduction of unfit for survivors. Capitalism. In an environment without natural predators, And this unthinking slaughter will continue in this fashion until a serious reaction on the part of wounded nature springs up in exotic lands, in the shape of terrible epidemics which fasten themselves to the heel of civilized Europe. He used quotation marks there. This enables us to understand that the Far Eastern plague was in actuality the result of the wholesale marketing in Asia of the pelts of rodents such as the woodchuck. Yeah, but we've always been at war with East Asia. Let us put these facts to one side in order that we may focus a bright ray of light upon the one decisive point. These examples conclusively prove that the profits that are produced by these commercial transactions do not have the slightest connection with the pressing material needs, right? It's luxury, it's decadence, it's decline, it's selling out the future and your children. What the Germans refer to as an alpine forest is just a recently reforested stand. A true alpine forest, as it appears to us in myth and saga, will spread itself all the ways to the ends of the earth. America, which during the time of the Indians was endowed with the richest forests on earth, has now begun to import lumber. The few regions that export their timber, i.e. Hungary, Russia, Scandinavia, and Canada, will soon be only regions endowed with a surplus. Yeah, but we've always been at war with Eurasia. The progressive nations, taken as a whole, annually cut down 350,000 tons of timber for the production of paper, or garbage, thereby cutting down one book every 2 minutes and one magazine every second. Excuse me. We can appreciate from these rough estimates alone just how massive the production of these items in civilized world really is. Someone should at least attempt to explain to us why it is necessary to inundate the world with such quantities of newspapers, scandal sheets, and fictional thrillers. I told you, garbage for the landfills. Should no explanation be forthcoming, we must consequently consider the cutting down of primeval forests to be an even greater offense. The Italians annually hunt down millions of migratory birds along their coasts, and they perform this operation in the most gruesome manner. What they themselves don't consume is packed up for export to England and France. Numbers will express this more clearly. In one example from 1909, a single vessel transported 260,000 living quails who were shipped in narrow cages to England, where the poor creatures were kept in miserable conditions until the quail fanciers got around to butchering them. On the Sorrento Peninsula, year after year, the birds have been captured alive, in numbers ranging as high as 500,000. For Egypt, the tally of the exterminated reaches 3 million, not counting the untold numbers of larks, ortolans, warblers, swallows, and nightingales who also perished. It was not hunger that required the slaughter of these plumed singers. They fell to luxury and greed. More gruesome still is the devastation directly attributed to the fashion industry, as we learn when we read about those greedy designers and merchants whose faculty of invention seems to have been inspired by Satan himself. In the words of the Cri de Paris, the Parisian milliners actually utilized up to 40,000 swallows and seagulls. A London merchant purchased during the preceding year 32,000 colibris, 80,000 seabirds, and 800,000 birds of different species. Right, but it's all yours to butcher, right? The human mind is no different. It is known that every year no fewer than 300 million birds are killed to adorn our ladies of fashion. There are lands where distinctive species once gave a unique appearance to regions from which they have now vanished. To guarantee that the feathers and down retain their brilliance, they must be plucked from the body of the birds while they still live. That is why one must not hunt the poor creatures with guns, but with nets. These inhuman hunters tear the feathers from their victims, who must endure the sufferings of the great martyrs before they perish in horrendous convulsions. Well, that's, again, this is life is object. This is no regard for life, and it shows in our culture, of which when Eric Fromm, psychologist Eric Fromm, who I've discussed before and will continue discussing, writes that it's this drive for death, and sometimes there is cruelty and malice in it, and sometimes it just seems to be kind of our primitive ancestors still hanging around, and this is why these kind of people make other people cringe, why it makes the higher classes and civilized Europeans cringe, right? Thinking of himself as well-bred, man refused to acknowledge the existence of such awkward happenings, while his women callously adorn themselves with the melancholy trophies of the hunt. It need not be emphasized that every one of the animal species that we have listed, along with many others such as the bird of paradise, are nearing the brink of extinction. Sooner or later, the same fate will befall every animal species, except for those whom man has destined for breeding or for domestication. The billions of animal pelts of North America, the countless blue foxes, sables, and Siberian ermines, I don't know how to pronounce that, all point to the excess of the fashion industry. In Copenhagen, in the years since 1908, a corporation has been developing a method of hunting whales in a more peaceful manner, according to a new method, i.e., employing ocean factories which process the carcasses immediately after the hunt. These swimming factories, during the course of 2 following years, processed approximately 500,000 of the largest animals on the earth, and the day is swiftly approaching when the whale known to history will have become a mere museum exhibit. For millennia, the American buffalo, the prize game of the Indians, roamed the prairie, but scarcely had the Europeans set foot on the continent when a lawless and savage slaughter broke out, so that today the buffalo is over and done with. In time, the same sad spectacle will be enacted in Africa. In order to furnish our so-called civilized man with billiards balls, buttons, combs, and similar tremendous necessary articles, the most recent calculations provided by Tournier of Paris indicate that 800,000 kilograms of pure ivory are processed annually. The result is the yearly slaughter of 50,000 of the most stupendous of the world's creatures. In the same way occurred the merciless killing of the antelope, the rhino, the wild horse, the kangaroo, the giraffe, the ostrich, and the gnu in the tropics, along with the polar bear, musk ox, arctic fox, walrus, and seal in the Arctic zone. An unparalleled orgy of destruction has seized mankind. And it is civilization that has unleashed this lust for murder, so that the earth withers before its noxious breath. These are indeed the fruits of progress, right? And all of these facts are well known. Well-meaning and warm-hearted individuals have raised the warning cry. Oh, I remember these people. Do you guys remember? There used to be a class here in America. There used to be classes of liberals and Democrats who used to talk about being anti-war. And then I think somewhere in the midst of perpetual warfare, that just evaporated with the hatred, right? You can't actually, when it's a boot on mankind and on animal kind forever, like that just can only exist for so long. That was a luxury at a place and time to have people who concern themselves with sincerity and morality and weeping morality, right? It's a certain type of spirit and soul who does this. Because everyone else is kind of in on the orgy of destruction, right? So, unparalleled orgy of destruction, we call this progress. All of these facts are well known, well meaning, and warm hearted individuals have raised the warning cry again and again during the past 10 years, urging mankind to protect nature and to preserve regional traditions from abuse. Unfortunately, neither the deepest causes for nor the massive consequences of the menace to nature have been comprehended. However, before we probe more deeply into these matters, we must continue to pronounce our accusation, right? I was going to say it's quite the impugnment. He's, that it's funny, the EPA is actually a recent invention. And by the time that was invented, a lot of Americans don't realize how thoroughly polluted and destroyed and cancerous this country had already been made, right? There's a reason why Americans die of cancer at a higher rate than anything and anyone else and anything else in history. So, yeah, the well-meaning, well-hearted individuals, they all seem dead. They were killed in the orgy of destruction. We need not concern ourselves with determining whether or not life extends beyond our world. I think he's talking about heaven or some kind of concern like that. Or whether the earth is in fact a living being, which was the belief of the ancients, or merely an unfeeling lump of dead matter, the modern view. It is only because the earth endures that the tracts of lands, the play of clouds, the bodies of water, the cloak of plant life, and the ceaseless activity of the animal kingdom have all been woven together in a profoundly animated totality, which gathers the individual creatures together as within an arc, which in turn itself is closely bound together with the great events of the infinite universe. An indispensable harmony resounds in the clamorous storms of the planet. Ooh, poetic, huh? In the sublime bleakness of the wilderness, in the solemnity of the highest mountains, in the appealing melancholy of the endless heath, in the mysterious fabric of towering forests, and in the pulsating lightning of the sea storm as it hurls its bolts against the coastline. Right, so this is the thing. When all nature, when all poetry and art has its origins in nature, and that nature has been increasingly destroyed and corralled and mankind himself under liberalism is reduced to cattle and object, right? um, it begins to show you how that affects our mind and imagination, right? He's not just talking about, oh my God, this reminds me of a story I'll say for another time, but um, it shows you how man has again been cut off from roots, from history, from himself, from his past, from anything real or imagined. The ability to imagine, even, right? So, what is he accounting here? I said this is like an accounting. It's not just the animals, and the animals aren't just objects, and it's not just man, and it's not just this notion of his mind, as if his mind has been improved by all these psychopaths and behavioralists and marketers and corporation state servants over the last, that have been purely manufactured in the last 50 to 100 years. Again, 1913, ladies and gentlemen. So, or this harmony may exist in a dreamy immersion in the primordial works of man. If, in a moment of profound reverie, we should direct our gaze upon the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the lotus-shaped capitals of Egypt's columns, or upon the brightly decorated bell towers of the Chinese and the structural clarity of the Hellenic temple, and they were a lot more colorful too. Americans imitated, and they could only imitate what they saw, which they they saw gray buildings everywhere because the eye couldn't pick up on the fact that the paint had worn off over the ages. So America built a bunch of gray buildings and called that government. Um, Rather than, beautifully adorned and painted temples. Or under the warm domesticity of the Dutch farmhouse and the Tartar encampment on the open steeps, we perceive that all of these creations breathe the very soul of the landscape upon which they stand. Oh, and this gets into Ed and Wanda's poetry. In some of her writings, she talks about, just like the Greeks did, just like so many natural people do, so many real human beings do. And by real human beings, I mean human beings who have a natural relationship with themselves and their environment and everything regardless of where they were going. Just because I've talked about people dying off, just because someone or something dies off doesn't mean it wasn't a superior specimen. But there's this illusion, though, that if you can destroy it or blot it out or make people forget, that it's not real, right? So it's a very common illusion, and people, the way words and rhetoric are so effective is that people are basically bound by a sort of word mysticism, and the dumber you are, the easier it affects you. So, he's going on about the land, and I got sidetracked from Ed and Wanda's poetry, where she describes, yeah, these beautiful structures just rising out of the earth as if part of the earth, right? Man was a part of and a locus of, but he he naturally fit in. He wasn't manufactured to be crammed in like a sardine can, or liquidated into a puck or pulp form, you know, something like that, right? Just like we treat the animals. So let's see, and man, the gray multi-level apartment building blocks still stand attached to an endless row of identical structures, sprout up wherever an educated person wishes to display his ability to increase prosperity. Oh, look at things like the projects in America, right? Um, Everywhere the rural fields are combined into rectangular plots, ancient grave sites are disturbed, thriving nurseries are obliterated, the reed-bordered fish ponds dry up, and the flourishing forested wilderness of yesteryear had to surrender its pristine state, because all trees must now line up like soldiers, and every woodland must be purged of the old thicket of poisonous undergrowth. The winding rivers which once suspended themselves in glittering labyrinthine curves now must become perfectly straight canals. The swift streams and waterfalls, and this is true even for Niagara, must now feed electric power plants. Ever-expanding force of smokestacks reach all the way to the ocean shores, and the water pollution caused by industry transforms nature's pristine waters into raw sewage. Oh, and so much worse too. Very soon, the face of the earth will be transformed into a gigantic Chicago. Holy shit, this is ironic. Um, Not just Chirac, because at the time, 1913, Chicago was a more booming city. It only had 2.4 million people, thereabouts, right? At least according to Google's history, I think. And then but the point was, it was being industrialized. It was being straightened. Nature was being destroyed and developed in a massive gray and red and, just kind of bland city and an industrialized city. And then from there, it's like, look at the aftermath of that. This is even more prophetic, the world into a gigantic Chicago. Think about what that means. A giant ghetto, just like a ghettofied world filled with gun violence and corruption. And I was laughing this morning because I happened to catch in the news that the city, the little village, the little city just south of Chicago, uh, Lori Lightfoot was hired, the mayor of Chicago was hired to do a corruption investigation. The city was flushed 6.45 million surplus, now is like 3.6 million in debt, and the mayor of that city fled basically. So again, the world is a giant Chicago, think about it. It means a giant ghettofied world of broken industry to be abandoned at a moment's notice when it's no longer profitable, left to its own corruption and violence. So, pock with a few patches of agriculture, yes, or just long stretches of commercialized capital, increasingly government subsidized and or owned agriculture. My God, cried the noble Occam von Arnhem at the beginning of the last century, where are the old trees which under we still rode only yesterday? And what has happened to the ancient inscriptions carved upon the boundary stones? Imagine caring about trees or stones, right? How crazy is that? Imagine caring about a tree or a rock. What's he on about? Where were the old, these things are already forgotten by our people, and nothing could be sadder than to see us striking against our own roots, right? And that was a managerial demiurge in books like Leviathan, not Hobbes's Leviathan, but the other Leviathan, I forget the author's name. He talks about how that managerial demiurge took over this orgy of destruction and fed it to be and conditioned itself, with this behavioral sort of psychology to attack all conservative values, all traditional values, to destroy families, to destroy everything, to serve the purpose of this worldwide state domination of nature, of man, right? So it's been increasingly systematized, and it made, in our case, the United States, it made us the most powerful superpower until the other two superpowers came into being. But remember, we've always been at war with Eurasia. So when the peak of the towering mountain has been but once stripped of its timber, no timber will ever grow there again. My mission is to see that Germany's heritage will not be squandered. Anne Lenoux's impression of the landscape of our homeland made him feel that, Anne Lenoux, feel that nature had been stuffed up in the throat so that blood spurts from her every pore. What would these men have to say about today? Perhaps they might, like Heinrich von Kleist, decide to quit the earth. Who, right? It's like modern Americans reacting to their own media, right? Whose son, man himself, have brought such shame upon his head. The devastation of the 30 Years' War did not bring about such fundamental alterations of the heritage of the past in town and countryside as the obsession of modern life with the ruthless, one-sided pursuit of practical purposes. So from the announcement of the establishment of the League for Nature Preservation, however, as regards the hypocritical nature feeling of the tourist trade, we need hardly direct our attention to the devastation, and nowadays it's like social media trade, right? It's like, got to get a picture of the thing, and the pursuit of the picture of the thing destroys the thing. Devastation which its exploitation of remote coastal regions and mountain valleys leaves in its wake. Even these matters were comprehensively addressed again and yet again, but the effort was wasted. The complete presentation was developed by 1880 through the efforts of the first writer, Rudolph, to whose 1910 essay on the relation of modern life to nature we would direct every reader's attention. And if those things were not enough, the rage for extermination has now dragged its bloody furrow through mankind himself. And I know you guys really hate those protesters these days, the environmentalists, and what they're doing. But honestly, I guess it's last line of end of the line, right? If nobody cares about anything anymore, then the only way you can ever get anyone's attention is to disrupt business, and that's also what's taught in America. But you see that very act becomes like the terrorist act. So what do you do when your hands are tied, right? The irony of it all. So, and if those things are not enough, rage for extermination has now dragged its bloody furrow through mankind himself. Tribal populations have dwindled, and some tribes have even vanished. Some were exterminated or starved to death, while others succumbed to disease. All were forced to accept the blessings of progress, brandy, opium, and syphilis. The Indians are over and over done with. The Australian Aborigines are finished, the noblest Polynesian are at their last gasp, and the most courageous African warriors who have fought the good fight, but now they must give way to civilization, and Europe has been seen an equally courageous folk. Europe's last primordial tribe, the Albanians, those eagle sons, whose ancestry can be traced directly back to the legendary Pelasgians, methodologically killed by the thousand at the hands of the Serbs. Make no mistake, progress is the lust for power and nothing else besides, and we must unmask its method as a sick, destructive joke. Irony. Utilizing such pretexts as necessity, economic development, and culture, the final goals of quote-unquote progress is nothing less than the destruction of life. The destructive urge takes many forms. Progress is devastating forests, exterminating animal species, extinguishing native cultures, masking and distorting the pristine landscape with the varnish of industrialism, and debasing the organic life that still survives. It's the same for livestock as for the mere commodity, and the boundless lust for plunder will not rest until the last bird falls. To achieve this end, the whole weight of technology has been pressed into service, and it is at last we realize that technology has become by far the largest domain of the sciences. Let us pause here for a moment. In a certain sense, even man belongs to nature. Some even suggest that man's nature belongs entirely to nature, right? So is it our nature to make plastic and turn the earth into a sewage dump? As we will see, that is certainly in Aranyo's view. In any case, when someone within himself struggles with life, if is not, after all, struggling with man himself, our chain of evidence will lose its most important links if we do not also offer illustrations of the self-demoralization of mankind. The roll call of the dead, which could be inscribed here, even were it to be restricted to the most important names, would far exceed the list of fallen animals. It will suffice to commemorate a few prominent victims. Where are the popular festivals and sacred customs which for uncounted millennia served for perpetual springs for myth and poetry? Where is now the rider on the meadow who will sow the precious seeds? And where can we find the procession of the Pentecostal bride and the torchbearer running through the cornfields? Where is now the intricate richness of traditional costume in which every folk could express its own nature and in its own landscape? The rich pendants, the multicolored bodices, the decorated waistcoats, sashes adorned with precious metals, and the light sandals. Oh shit, belongs to the rich. Where can we find now the toga-style shawls, the pleated turbans, and flowing kimonos? The industrialists. They're all being replaced by civilized attire. Throughout the world, civilization distributes the three-piece suit for the men, and the women the latest Parisian style. Prefabricated for you. I like the suit. I'll keep my poetry, but I like the suit. Where now do we find the folk song, the ever-renewed treasury of melody, which cloaks with its fabric a silver man's growing old and passing away? Wedding, feast, and solemn wake, right? What gives meaning to man? What gives meaning to life? What gives meaning to the earth, right? Is it just industrializing it, turning it into, products, dead meat? And this is the corrupting influence of it, whether it's social media influencers or the whole system that's been sold for 100 years now. If you dangle red meat, especially in front of hungry animals, it's like they will do, they'll generally do what, especially all the more traumatized they are, all the more deranged they are, which to me really, when I think of American culture, 85% working poor, enslaved and beaten and abused for hundreds of years, it's hard not to see a lot of poverty here in America, right? It's so unhappy because it's so traumatic for a lot of people, right? And then the head job is seeing this society that's doing fine around you, this world that's doing fine around you, right? You're the problem, of course, right? Not anyone or everything else. How could you be so stupid? What's wrong with you? Why can't you figure it out? Why can't you fit in? Why can't you wink, wink, nod, nod, get the joke? No matter how much we press the veil without piercing it, right? No one's going to tell you, no one ever tells anyone the real answers, right? They'll sell imitations and manufacture answers or sell prescriptions, but man has no cultural remedy. And there's nothing outside the corporation state because everything has to be fed into that because that's all that exists anymore. So this is what he's saying. What happened to man? What happened to like living organic man? What happened to the creative being? Um, so let's see. For farewell, for homecoming, oh, what would happen to these poems and songs composed for the dance, for the brimming goblet, for farewell and for homecoming? I think with all those things being destroyed, those feelings being destroyed and corporatized, for consecration and magical incantation, for the dust that falls in the spinning room before the battle and at the bier of the slain was once stirred by songs of scorn, by martial anthems of dark bright poetry, blending mountain, spring, and shrub, the animals of the household, wild game and plant, the force of the wind and the torrent of rain. Even work was felt to be a kind of festival, a feeling that has long since been inconceivable to us. Right, the plantation or the corporate plantation. Song was not reserved solely for roving and revelry. Song accompanied the hoisting of the anchor, the rhythm of the oar stroke, the shifting of heavy cargo. Reminds me of my dad singing. Um, and I always got the feeling that he was singing to let me know that things were fundamentally okay. He might not have had the words for it, but he had the expression for it. Right? He didn't have the reason, the rationale, the scientific explanation for it, but he had the song or the tune or the hum for it. Not only has progress made life gray, it has always also silenced life's very voice. But now we forget that after the primordial melody of the popular ballads comes the operetta and the syrupy idioms of the cabaret. After legendary musical instruments like the Spanish guitar, the Italian mandolin, the Finnish cantella, the Geisli of the southern Slavs, and the Russian balalaika, there comes the piano and the record player. There we have the fruits of progress. Like all devouring conflagration, progress scours the earth. And the place that has fallen to its flames will flourish nevermore, so long as man still survives. The animal and plant species cannot renew themselves. Man's native warmth of heart has gone. The inner springs that once nurtured the flourishing songs and sacred festivals are blocked, and there remains only a wretched and cold working day and the hollow show of noisy entertainment. There can be no doubt. We are living in the era of the downfall of the soul. There would still be large personalities under such circumstances. We certainly do not wish to underestimate the ingenuity of the masters of the technology, nor the computational talent of our captains of industry, right? Like I said, 3 nations perpetually at war, Leviathan, a super dragon. Nevertheless, if one place such mere talent alongside a true creator's strength, we must surely come to the conclusion that technology is without the slightest capacity to enrich life. The cleverest machine has meaning only in the service of a purpose, and even the most extensive, and when you keep rewriting that purpose in your history books and then lying to everyone's faces as you turn them out into the next generation of manufactured product, right, it leaves a sour taste. But I guess, we'll get there someday where there will be no more history to rewrite, if you really think about it. The cleverest machine has meaning only in the service of a purpose, and even the most extensive industrial organization of today will be nothing in 1,000 years. Whereas the poetry of Homer, the wise words of Heraclitus, and the symphonies of Beethoven belong to the undying treasures of life. But how sad we become when we think of those who once were justly proclaimed to us as the most illustrious of men. When we look at our poets and thinkers of today, whom do we have still, since the veterans of the spirit and the deed have departed? Burckhardt, Bachofen, Mommsen, Bismarck, Keller, and even Nietzsche, the last flame from that old fire, all of them gone without a trace, without a successor. But there are people who have meaningfully carried out their work, including Klages right here. It is as with the empty up. Where was I? Yeah, it is as empty up on Parnassus as it is in politics and thought, and we will maintain a discreet silence regarding the putrefying arts. Copies of copies. When we came down to cynicism, irony, right? It's just flooded it. Never mind modern pop art that's been manufactured for decades now. When we come down to the level of everyday life, we can see very clearly the total nihilism behind all the commonplace chatter about personality and culture. Most men do not really live, they merely exist, some to be used up as if they were mere machines in the service of some great undertaking. And this was Kurt Vonnegut Jr.'s Player Piano. Eventually, the piano learns to play itself. You don't even need man, right? And that was the spookiest line in that book, was when the drunk guy, I think the drunk prole, basically the equivalent in that world, the Reeks and the Wrecks, some old drunk guy from some era when people still played piano, was there, and he was talking about the player piano, the mechanical piano, and the end of the chapter reads something like, "There it is, lighting up," as if there's a ghost there, but there it is, just playing itself, right? Um, so I was he was talking about the downfall of the soul. Most men do not exist. Oh yeah, this is bad. This is quite the impugnment too. Some to be used up as if they are mere machines in the service of some great undertaking, and some to be reduced to the status of money slaves, deliriously busying themselves with the value of stocks and bonds. Some finally attach themselves to the frenzied diversions offered by the big city. Many likewise are oppressed by the wretched and ever-increasing tedium of this existence. In no earlier time was unhappiness greater or more poisonous, right? And happiness more difficult. Groups of men, large or small, whose members are bound each to the other in the furtherance of some special interest, struggle endlessly to destroy their enemies. Right, so showing you the condition of how modern man turned out unhappy. Such enmity may arise from commercial, political, racial, or religious grounds. At times, one may discover such crazed power struggle. Oh, I read that. Humans the world over always seem to project their own prejudices onto their environment. Thus man foists his own obsession with status under the power onto nature, wherein he swiftly discovers a wild struggle for existence. He convinces himself that he must have been in the right if he alone survived this struggle for existence, and plants the world in the guise of a great machine, where the pistons only give off the steam that must turn the wheels, in order that energy, one does not see to what end, will be transferred. He accompanies all of this with a bit of idle chatter about the so-called philosophy of monism, which utterly falsified the billion-fold life of nature in order to reduce the universe to the level of the human ego. Paganism versus monotheism. Where one previously prized love or renunciation or a God-intoxicated withdrawal from the world, we find instead a newly hatched success religion, which is announced from atop the graves of former ages. To those of little faith, whose coming had been anticipated by Nietzsche, with whose white-hot scorn and a knowing wink makes his last man proclaim, "We have invented happiness." Blink, right? And as I said in the last video, when it comes to the last man, I said, they couldn't understand Zarathustra at all about the Superman, so he gave them something they could relate to, and he said, okay, if you can't be the immediate bridge to the future, here's a reminder of the past. Here's the past yet that is coming, because we are dealing with the most contemptuous man. What you can relate to at least is contempt, right? You know what it's like to feel contempt. And yet, even at the end of that lesson, there's a biblical parody in here where they go, the tragedy of it, the irony of it, is they go, make us into this last man. It's right, even the Superman's over their head and the last man is over their head, right? And I remember pointing this out to someone in a literary analysis once, and they were convinced that it could only be interpreted one way, as if Nietzsche had nothing to do with Christianity or critique thereof or a parody and satire thereof, especially in Zarathustra and all that relates to the larger pagan traditions and religious impulse. I know it's not limited to parodying Christianity, but it doesn't exist without it, and it's part of the story as well, right? That it became part of the story. And anyway, that's exactly it, though. We have invented happiness. No idea. No idea what the most profound thinkers and feelers and philosophers and scientists have ever thought or felt or been like, but has been convinced that the mass manufactured world that resulted from pilfering all ages, including the present, of its powerfully destructive technology, has made them the most powerful being on earth. And yet again, the tyranny of it is that it's relegated to just a fake god. So, right, the corporation state, there's three of them. They're going to win the war eventually, right? So Check back in we were past 2013, 1913, 2013, and 3013. Let me know if we've won the war yet, okay? Of course, the superficial errors in all of these systems, sects, and tendencies will not be with us for very longer. Nature knows no struggle for existence, but only a caring for life. Many insects die after the act of procreation, thus demonstrating the slight emphasis that nature places upon mere preservation. Right? Why would that which exists need to exist? It already exists. Nature only ensures that similar forms will continue to unfold amidst the surging waves of life. What prompts one animal to hunt another to the death is simply the need to appease the predator's hunger, greed, ambition, and the lust for power have no place here. In reality, there is a gaping abyss here that no evolutionary logic will ever bridge. Species were never exterminated by other species, since every excess on one side is followed almost immediately by a reciprocal reaction on the other. The ranks of the vanquished are thinned, and the booty of the slain foe becomes the sustaining of the stronger. Transformation, however, is consummated over gigantic periods of time and invariably leads to a burgeoning of lower life forms in the vicinity. Right, so it's like Nike and Nemesis, right? It's like no matter your victory, compensation will come, and that compensation comes from outer forces, i.e., the Olympians, i.e., the gods, those who came after the Titans. The annihilations of hundreds of species during the course of mankind's earthly tenure permits no point of comparison with the wholesale extinction of the dinosaur and the mammoth. Utterly mindless, moreover, is the transfer of the numerically quantifiable operations of the physical laws that govern the conservation of energy to questions of life. No single living cell has ever been created in a chemical retort, and should science ever announce such an achievement, it will not have been as a result of some combination of physical forces, but because even the chemical matter with which such an experiment must begin is already instinct with life. I don't know, did they figure out that like amino acids and proteins, like one was organic and inert and one was like, had the different markers of life? Did they figured that out at that time? I don't remember. Life is an enduring perpetual renewal of formative power. Shoot, I don't even think they knew the Earth was a universe at that time, or part of a universe. That time, I think they still thought the galaxy was the universe. They didn't even know that the galaxy was one galaxy and a universe of countless galaxies, right? That might have barely just been being discovered at that point. The earth will be right. So man's ego has an ever hard increasing time of dealing with the fact that he's not the center of the universe or the end all be all of evolution, or that he needs to have power to exist. Right. This is why Big Brother is such a sham. Is that at the end of the day, to finally get his more immortality, to finally deal with his insecurity, to exist perpetually, to finally exist, mankind had to cease existing. We have discovered happiness, right? So anyway, we exterminate living species, perpetual renewal of formative power, extinguish some measure of such power whenever we exterminate a living species or a man, right? We never know what we're losing. For every like Einstein or great artist or Hendrix or thinker, and I'm just using these names because people know them, common ones, right? That for every one of those, like how many just die off? How many are never known? How many never even get to exist or killed off in some big slaughter or bombing? And how many worlds you never know what and we just never know what we're losing. So anyway, the chemical matter which with an experiment must begin is already instinct with life. And you could argue we never even know what we have, right? Know that the greatest minds are not understood by humanity. The idea that present man actually understands the greatest mind who shaped all of humanity and continues to shape them, even if in cheap imitation form to this day, right? It's insanity. So utterly mindless is this transfer of the numerically quantifiable operations of the physical laws that govern, life is an enduring, perpetual renewal of formative power, and we extinguish it whenever we exterminate a living species, and the earth will be impoverished until the end of time because of it, regardless of any detriment to the so-called conservation of energy, or i.e. entropy, right? Oh, it's just entropy working, right? It's like the irony. You can't do anything. As we have said, such erroneous teachings will fade and perish eventually, but the resulting all too real eventualities that they have brought to pass will remain, making all those conceptual schemes seem more like mere shadows of thought than the genuine article. There is certainly no basis for the opinion that, excuse me, As we have said, such erroneous teachings will fade and perish eventually, but the resulting all too real eventualities that they have brought to pass will remain, making all those conceptual schemes seem like more mere shadows of thought than genuine article. There is certainly no bias for the opinion that considers the ongoing destruction to be a mere side effect of passing conditions, out of which will arise some sort of attempt at reconstruction. With that, we arrive at the meaning of the preceding course of events to which man has given the name world history, which we continue to write to this day. The history we learned in school, even in the in the 80s and 90s, is not the same as the history they're teaching in school now. It's not the same as the history they'll be teaching in what's left of the government education school institution, in a few years. So the ancient Greeks had no skill with electrical wiring, power cables, and radios, and this fact sheds light on their habitual scorn for physical science, which they saw as a rather lowly business, right? They just took pride in what they were. They weren't struggling to be something they were not. They were not trying to, the best, like they prided themselves on being who they were from the cities they were from, natural inhabitants of their natural world, right? They weren't constantly trying to exist. They had no concern for existing, you could say, which is why they easily fell to a civil war. But it seems like it happens that way no matter what. So they had no concern. Technology was beneath them. Obsession with tools was beneath them. But only they could construct temples, carve images on columns, and cut precious gems, right? What's created is what's mattered. The people, the art, of such beauty and delicacy that we can only compete with them by presenting our most artificial tools. Without conducting experiments and supported only by everyday perception, the Greek philosophers have influenced and in large part governed the course of Western thought for over 2 millennia. Now you just reduce that down to like Skinner box manipulation and think that's clever. The didactic virtue of Socratic has been revived in the scrawnier categorical imperative. Oh, and this is the reaping of our dark image future, right? That in a post-moral world, all that matters is image. So all that matters is basically damage control and psychological warfare in the end, right? Collateral damage doesn't matter because what can anyone do about it? It doesn't matter that man is destroyed. It doesn't matter that no man can have power or reputation or be seen as a hero or a role model, right? Only institution matters. Only party matters. Only tools matter. Only technology matters. Only these vague abstracts matter. The didactic virtue of Socrates has been revived in the scrawnier categorical imperative of Kant. The Platonic doctrine of the ideas has been revived in the aesthetics of Schopenhauer, and the philosophical framework of the atomistic theory of chemistry stems directly from Democritus. Faced with these facts, it is not more likely that the Greeks avoided physical science not because of their lack of capacity for such study, but because they might not have chose any dealing with it. Perhaps their mystics might enable us to recover many insights that have been lost to us. You don't build great temples. Let us take another example. The Chinese of antiquity would have seen all the modern discoveries as alien to their culture. The modern Chinese would feel the same way towards it shows you how pretentious it all is, towards these discoveries had we not compelled China to accept them by force. We are likewise impressed by the great Chinese philosophers, sages such as Lao Tzu or Li Tzu, who speak to us in words of wisdom that even Goethe seems like a bungler by comparison. Thus, if the Chinese did not possess a science with whose assistance they might have been able to build cannons, blow up mountains, and grace their tables with margarine, that is because they had no desire for these things. Again, as a culture and as a people, they were happy to live as they did and be as they are. Their hand had not been forced by the death cult of industry and statistical reality. Right? Everyone's happier. Everyone's happy all the time. Before the progressive research of modern times could be undertaken, the intellectuals had to be conditioned to adopt a philosophical theory upon which would be founded a required practice, Leviathanianism. Right? Maybe this is why they all got the term lizard men and why they're some of the most hated classes and hated people of all history. You can see in their abuse, too, right, that they earn their reputations, i.e., a lot of these people, we call that practice capitalism, right? So to be clear, the intellectuals had to be conditioned, right? Well, first off, the biggest intellectuals of all culture were steadily killed off over time, right? That's always been history. And then over time, as the progenitors and the ruling classes of cultures were killed off and died or made to submit, eventually what was left of the intellectuals had to be conditioned to adopt a philosophical theory upon which would be founded a required practice. We call that practice capitalism. Similarly, with tribes on the decline, or tribes that had been brought to submit by the sword, Christianity then became appealing, right? Because look, now that you're in a pit of hell, we're going to save you, right? We will save you from the pits of hell after we put you there, right? So there's got to be, there's got to be something psychological to that, right? So we call that practice capitalism. Christianity, now progressivism, now liberalism, turning mankind into cattle. No intelligent person can have the slightest doubt that the dazzling achievements of physics and chemistry have been pressed into the exclusive service of capital. The identifying characteristics of modern science is its substitution of numerical quantities for unique qualities, thus merely recapitulating in the cognitive form the fundamental law that the will must control everything, even that which resides in the brightly colored domain of the soul and its values, the values of blood, beauty, dignity, ardor, grace, warmth, in the maternal sense. These must yield to the insidious values of the power which judges the worth of man by the weight of his gold. Remember, mankind's a judge, but man is not fit to judge. So anyway, a new word for this viewpoint has been coined, mammonism. Nevertheless, how few are conscious of the fact that this mammon is a genuine substantial entity which seizes hold of man, right? This is, I think, Fromm was trying to get away from the past by calling it necrophilic, and he was also trying to inspire a feeling of disgust in people, and also alarm. Like it was a very clever way of a psychologist, a man limited and bound by the terms of his science and his field and the way he must address the world, and kind of suitable probably to his nature, or he wouldn't have done it or dedicated his life to the study, right? But again, when Fromm calls the tendency necrophilic, necrotic, right, the worship of death, turning things into objects. We love seeing dead mounted objects. We love seeing things dominated. We love seeing things win. We love a boot on mankind's face forever. We love judging, right? We love hating. So we have already indicated that progress, civilization, and capitalism constitute different manifestations of the same direction of the will. We must likewise admit that the disciples that this will-centered worldview on are drawn exclusively from the Christian world. Only within that world were the inventions accumulated. Only when the world was that quantifying exact, scientific methodology brought to perfection, and finally only within that world, that Christian world which is perpetually engaged with the most ruthless imperialism imaginable, could one find those men who have sought to conquer all of non-Christian races, just as they have sought to conquer the whole of nature. Consequently, we are compelled to locate the proximate causes of world historical progress in Christianity itself. It's where it all comes from. Modern liberalism wanted the kingdom, but without God in it, right? So now we've come to believe in humanism and progress and blah-de-blah, right? The revolution is coming. Krusty's going to be here. The party is corrupt. The party has sold man out, but they're also the keepers of democracy. You have to vote for them, right? So this is the tyranny of our irony. Progress is Christianity. On the surface, of course, Christianity seems always to be preaching sermons in praise of love. This is your definition of love. You should have a better definition of love. But when we take a closer look at this love, we discover that in reality, this persuasive word functions, right? Yeah, whoever thinks of Christian love as love has a very low opinion of love, very shallow. So, we discover that in reality, this persuasive word functions like a gilded surface. Made it easy to transfer to a post-moral world, an imagistic world, right? Because the image can paper over the irony, which masks the underlying reality of the categorical command, you must. Oh, don't worry, Klages, now it's you art, or you're canceled. And this unconditional command applies solely to man, who has now come to consider himself as divine, as a God standing in opposition to the whole of nature, right? Christianity may mouth such phrases as the welfare of mankind, of humanity, but what the voice inside these formulas is really saying is that no other living being has the slightest intrinsic value or purpose, right? Mentally ill. So the medical industry's motto could be don't bother us, as well as the corporate model, really, right? Or bother with customer service. Someone in India, what mental illness means in America is we don't know what to do with this person. We can get no value from them. Right? Except they're not human. There's another way of putting it. They're inhuman, they're subhuman, except insofar as it can be forced to serve the purposes of man. From time immemorial, the love of the Christian has never prevented him from prosecuting religious pagans with a murderous hatred, and this same love doesn't prevent him from abolishing the sacred rituals of conquered tribal cultures. It's a well-known fact that Buddhism prescribes the killing of animals because a Buddhist recognizes the obvious fact that each and every earthly creature shares a common nature with man himself. But when one objects of the Italian's murdering of an animal, he will immediately respond by assuring you that the creature has no soul and is not a Christian. This indicates clearly that to the devout Christian, only man has a right to live. Only Christian man. Only progressive man. To the people of the ancient world, religion, which is at time also proceeded according to this pattern, that even now springs up in hovels of the people, restrains its standard bearer, and yet excites him on the other hand, and permits the power of one to threaten the peace of the world to prosper until it has become the terrifying megalomania that considers the bloodiest offenses against life to be permitted, and even commanded, provided such deeds result in benefits to humanity. Capitalism, along with its pathfinder science, is in point of fact the fulfillment of Christianity. The church, like science, constitutes a consortium of special interests, and the one that is addressed by a secularized morality is indistinguishable from the life-hostile ego, which is the name of the unique Godhead of the Spirit. Only now coupled with a blind cosmology accounts for the war that has been waged against the innumerable many gods of the world. Earlier ages were at least more honest in their opposition to the cosmic deities, for they frankly approached the fray in the menacing aspect of judges, right? Even Christ, when he said, I'm going to destroy this horrible world. And it says a lot. It says a lot about if the point of your religion and the end of your religion is to destroy the earth, right? What matters most, what means the most to man, where his only existence that we can actually be aware of is, right? Let's say by perception of our own sensory senses. We'll throw a bone to the metaphysicians out there and say, sure, maybe. We don't care, though. We're working off what ifs, and what is and what are, right? Right? If the past, if the future catches up to you from behind, right? What is the relation between the past, the present, and the future? These become all important questions. So, right, when you object to mass murder, people get upset. Let's see, blind cosmology accounts for the perpetual war. Oh, and that's the irony, right? So that's why we needed irony, because the earlier ages could be honest about what they were and have no shame or guilt in it. But in the modern age, people can't feel okay. They're not allowed to. You have to be unhappy. You have to feel guilty and shameful and pitiable, and it's like a base morality. It's like a psychologically arrested form of development, really. By now it should be perfectly clear, however, that he who seeks to enrich himself whilst he stomps earth's blossoms into dust, as man is the bearer of calculating reason and will to acquisition. It's calculated, right? Detailed, it's planned, it's designed, it's not an accident. This wasn't an incident. Not an accident that big tech has everyone's data. That was just following the model. Right? Then you can really control people. Man is the bearer of calculating reason and the will to acquisition. The gods with whom he has torn the tree of life is the perpetually changing images of the phenomenal world from which he has exiled himself. This reminds me of Zaff's Last Messiah. I think I'll read that on in one of our future analyses. The hostility to images, which is inwardly nurtured by the self-lacerating Middle Ages, had to emerge into the light of day as soon as it had achieved its goal, which was to sever the bond of connecting man to the soul of the earth. And man's bloody atrocities against his fellow creatures, he could only complete that which he himself had already begun, to exchange the multiform patterns of living images for the homeless transcendence of that world-alienated spirit. He has shown enmity to the planet that bore and nursed him, and even to the what did I just say about Christ as judge even, right? And revolutions of the starry heavens, because he is now possessed by a power that resembles a vampire, which introduces itself into the music of the spheres, sounds of an ear-shattering dissonance, in the guise of, we have invented happiness, we have discovered happiness. Blink. As this point is clear, however, that in the course of this very ancient evolutionary process, Christianity signifies but one epoch, From distant beginnings, this process has now reached its final stage. Certainly, the unique physiognomy of Europe is decisively shaped by the process. I butchered that word, but I don't want to go back. Um, in fact, the force that provokes man's enmity against the world is precisely as old as world history. The history that is surnamed the evolutionary process, that dreary process of existence, which in the course of Pink Floyd's Time, right? Which in the course of events marches beyond and ever onwards and cannot be compared to the destiny of other organisms, begins at the very moment of man's expulsion from paradise. Excuse me. When he finds himself on the outset seeing now with the cold, clear gaze of the stranger, and knowing that he has lost his previous accord with plants and animals, with oceans and clouds, with rocks, winds, and stars, in the midst of almost every people we encounter bloody battles in prehistoric ages between solar heroes who are bent upon installing a new order and the chthonic powers of fate who are finally banished into the lightless world. Right? Think of the Titans and Zeus. Right? Nevertheless, a Jesuit scholar, in an astonishing but instructive reversal of circumstances, has discovered in the legend of the acts of the Greek Heracles a prophetic plagiarism of the life of the Christian Redeemer. The above-mentioned reorganization with which history begins is always and everywhere the same, the rewriting of history. Over the soul rises a spirit, over the dream reigns a wide-awake rationality, over life which becomes and passes, right? And as my dad pointed out once upon a time to me, that what you can tell about a lot of these stories, the language of religious language, the language of the soul is always around sight, seeing, awakeness, being awakened, the body being awake, the body being sharp, the body being sincere, the body eliminating the hack, the body being upright, forthwith, beautiful, strong, and good, full of character, Anyway, during the millennia development of spirit Christianity, Christianity was the only final crucial thrust. Therefore, spirit, which emerged from a condition, right? Spirit cutting into spirit, life, emerged from a condition of powerless knowledge. Prometheus is in chains, while Heracles is free. Now penetrates the will. Okay, do you hear this? It's almost, to paraphrase here, he's almost saying Apollo versus Dionysus, right? Sky god versus the chthonic, Dionysus versus crucified, which have constituted without interruption the history of nations ever since, have revealed the truth that has thereto seemed to be merely a notion, that a power from outside our cosmos had broken into the sphere of life. Ah, yes, the outer gods, right? The outer gods upon whose sphere and influence our primitive psychology knows we have no understanding or belonging. And it varies between soul and sentiment, but all of society has gathered around this religious tendency and feeling, and these very important circuitry that have now for the last few centuries and millennia have only recently been channeled in these monotheistic ends, which ends with a basically necrophilia, love of the dead, love of death. For that reason, our dearest desire is simply for everyone to open his eyes. Further, we should desist from all attempts to blend together things that are surrounded by the profound abyss that separates the powers of love and the soul on one side from the powers of reason and the will on the other. We must perceive that the very essence of the will is manifest in compulsion to tear the veil of Maya to tatters. For when man has been reduced to the status of a mere creature of will, he must in a blind rage set his hand against his own mother, the earth. In the end, all of life, along with man himself, will be swallowed up by nothingness. And it seems like, again, back to Big Brother 1984, the irony that to resist that fact, to prove that he existed, man invented Big Brother, right? No teaching can return to that which has been lost. Regarding all such attempts, we feel that man simply does not have the ability to bring about a transformation of his inner life on his own. Okay, I'm almost to the end here. Otherwise, I was going to defer more to later. Excuse me. Right? We feel that man simply does not have the ability to bring about the transformation on his own. We stated earlier that the ancients have never presumed to unravel nature's secrets by means of experiments, never thought to conquer her through the use of machines, which they dismissed as clever contraptions that were suitable only for slaves. We now insist, moreover, that they abhorred such attempts at ungodliness. Forest and spring, boulder and grotto were for them filled with sacred life. From the summits of their lofty mountains below the storm winds of the gods, it was not from lack of a feeling for nature that one did not climb their peaks. And tempest and hailstones threatened or clashed furiously in the play of battle. And there's something to be said around a culture that does have a lot of luxury and decadence in dangerous sports and dangerous things where people have to risk their own life and limb just to feel alive. It's like the ancients had that as life. Modern people have to be sold that. In ancient German lands, an offense against a living tree was expiated by the shedding of the offender's blood. Today's mankind sees only childish superstition in those who attend to the planetary currents. He forgets that the interpreting of apparitions was a way of scattering blooms around the tree of an inner life, which shelters a deeper knowledge than all of science, the knowledge of the world-weaving power of all-embracing love. Only when this love has been renewed in mankind will the wounds inflicted by the matricidal spirit be healed, right? So when the crazy people say things like, "Oh, mankind manufactured a postmodern sky penis," it's not all crazy talk. Or a manufactured clock is right 100 times a day, right? 100% of the day. The object, the tool is manufactured, but it doesn't account for man's own personal sense of soul or time, or soul, or the sun or the moon even. It was a mere 100 years ago that something truly new welled up within the hearts of men, as if from out of the depths of mysterious springs. So dating it back 2 centuries. So we're on, is that 2 centuries of nihilism or 1 century of nihilism? We were alluding to those unforgettable dreamers, those childlike sages and poets whom we conventionally called the Romantics. Their expectations were illusory and their storm has subsided, right? But illusion is necessary to life, right? Even if it's Big Brother. Their wisdom has been buried, the flood has receded, and the desert grows. Nevertheless, we are prepared, like the Romantics, to believe in miracles, and we are quite willing to deem it possible that a coming generation may indeed see the birth of a new world. Perhaps the visionary words of Eichendorff in foreboding of the present best describes the labor pains that must precede the birth of that world. He goes on to quote him. Klages quotes Eichendorff. Our age seems to me to resemble an ever-expanding, uncertain twilight. Light and shadow battle still, powerful forces that appear to be inseparable. Storm clouds brew dark destinies, and no one can tell whether their portents indicate death or benediction. Remember, this is prior to World War II, and even World War I's getting heated up. And the wider world, is set in motion through Christian history. And wider world below remains abandoned to its hollow expectations. Comets and celestial messages haunt the heavens once more. Phantom spirits wander through the night, and mythical sirens plummet into sea as if they fled in a dread of some approaching tempest that has already obscured the mere surface of the waters. And in modern capitalist shallow terms, everyone's cashing in on the decline. But he's going on. They sing, gesticulating with bloody fingers, warning us of some terrible impending doom. No carefree childhood game or frolic can delight our young people as much as those sessions of long ago, during which our forefathers prepared us for the serious side of life. Hey, look, and I'm sorry they did this to you. I'm sorry we did this to you. You're not going to hear it from anyone else. They have to defend the butchering. They have to defend the mind control. They have to defend the slaughter. They have to defend the war machine. They have to defend the 3 superpowers, right? They have to defend everything as it is, right? Because everything is fine. Everyone's happy. Life is statistical. Happiness is statistical. Everything is as it should be. So we were born in battle, and regardless of whether we are victor or vanquished, we will perish in battle. For far from out the magical mists of our school days, there takes shape the ghost of war, clad in armor, with the pallid face of death, and with blood-splattered hair. His eyes are well accustomed to solitude, and they already perceive through the webs of smoke that swirl all around the almost imperceptible outlines of the coming struggle. Woe to those who, when the hour of battle strikes, find themselves unarmed and utterly unprepared for combat. Oh man, if you parse this out to understand history in Europe at the time, people got destroyed by the millions. How many weak men who fritter away their idle hours in the pursuit of pleasure are in frivolous reflections, who manage to deceive themselves as readily as they deceive the world, will recall the words of Prince Hamlet. This time is out of joint. O cursed spite, that ever I was brought to set it right. Then out of the collapse of the world will emerge once more an unright. Remember, Shakespeare's English, he's gloomy too. will emerge once more an unprecedented contest between the old and the new. And the passions of today that slink about in disguise will find that their masks are now disparaged. A burning frenzy will burst forth, flaming torch held high into the pandemonium, as if the inferno itself had been loosed upon the world. Justice and injustice will seem to have merged their natures into a blind access of rage. Hail, Big Brother. But miracles will at last take place, and the just will receive their just rewards, and a new yet somehow very ancient sun will radiate its light through the scenes of horror. The thunder will still roll, but only upon the peaks of distant mountains, and then the white dove will soar aloft in the clear blue skies, and the earth itself will shine with a brighter light from the heavens above. Right. So there are still happy isles. There is still poetry in the world. The poetry of the earth can never die unless we fully industrialize it and compress it all down into puck or paste form, which we have increasingly done. I didn't mean for any of a few of my ironical points or jokes to detract from the sincerity and the sincerity of it. Not just this is record keeping and Klages here, speaker of the dead and the damned, but very much talking about a control of the mind. If the soul has already been robbed and the mind is what's left, then it's not even a spiritual war anymore. It's just a control for the mind, a mindless war, a perpetual war that must be waged by perpetual forces and perpetual individuals and groups who don't even have cohesion in their groups. And it's funny, it was only a cult it was an occult that came out of America, where I once found a funny little writing. It was Alcoholics Anonymous. They have this little blurb in one of their literature where they say that they could see that to their mind in America, remember, these guys were veterans of World War II, actually. So no wonder they were alcoholics. No wonder they were traumatized. Just like Kurt Vonnegut Jr. relates kind of in his stories, or the sublimation of his stories. But what's sold is that this mass mechanized warfare, that this mass death was cool and sexy, and that it became the model and the uniform, right? But what I was getting at is that with Kurt Vonnegut Jr. and these other stories is that the end result of so many warring factions, individuals, and groups, they saw that all this willpower end result was ruin. So I guess the story of progress to them was that everyone was going to be equal in the rubble, right? And this is what we keep selling ourselves, and this is what we keep telling ourselves, that things are better, people are happier. Good thing reality is statistical. Good thing when you make up and lie about the numbers anyway, when you have to fudge the numbers or just kind of cram them through anyway, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. The numbers can be what they are. Everything, what is already is, right? But I didn't want to just end on a bleak note or a dark note, because that was both like I said, it's a bit of history, a bit of a status sheet, or not status sheet, but and a bit of an accounting. And here is an aphorism I'm going to read to end us today. So, 49, Goodwill. Amongst the small but countless frequent and therefore very effective things to which science should pay more attention than to the great rare things, is to be reckoned goodwill. I mean that exhibition of a friendly disposition in intercourse, that smiling eye, that clasp of the hand, that cheerfulness with which almost all human actions are usually accompanied. Every teacher, every official adds to this whatever is his duty. It is the perpetual occupation of humanity, and at the same time the waves of its light, in which everything grows. In the narrowest circle, namely, within the family, life blooms and flourishes only through that goodwill. Kindliness, friendliness, the courtesy of the heart are ever-flowing streams of unegoistic impulses, and have given far more powerful assistance to culture than even those much more famous demonstrations which are called pity, mercy, and self-sacrifice. But they're thought little of. He's saying goodwill is thought little of. It's not measured. It's not counted. It doesn't exist in statistics or psychology. Psychology doesn't concern itself with happiness. The medical industry doesn't concern itself with happiness. But they are thought little of, and as a matter of fact, there is not much that is unegoistic in them. The sum of all these small doses is nevertheless mighty. Their united forces is among the strongest forces. Their, Their. Their united forces, goodwill, amongst the strongest forces. Thus one finds much more happiness in the world than sad eyes see. if only one reckons rightly and does not forget all those moments of comfort in which every day is rich, even in the most harried of human lives. So, think about people earnestly smiling, babies, children, butterflies, a moment of happiness, a moment of rest, a moment with the family, a moment with people you love, a moment enjoying art with people you love, a moment doing something fun with people you love. Whatever it is, but whatever, if it's human, it does evolve or revolve around other people in some capacity. And to this day, there is and will be a lot of goodness in the world. So I hope that finds you today. I hope happiness visits you. I hope you can watch it fly away like a butterfly and appreciate it all the same. Again, I'm Zach Markowski, Sharper Pen Image Consulting. Today we read Earth and Man by Ludwig Klages. And I'm not sure what's up next, but thanks for checking us out. Please like, share, subscribe, share the content if you think it's good, relevant, or interesting. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.